Remote desktop and remote assistance. In this nugget, we take a look at remote desktop and remote assistance, which are very closely related. Remote desktop involves a single user, whereas remote assistance involves two users. Remote desktop is just me trying to connect from one computer to the next so I can access a desktop remotely without having to visit that workstation or a server, which could be thousands of miles away perhaps. We'll take a look at how to enable that so that you can do that functionality. That will include also adding additional users and or groups that have the privilege of being able to do that, which really only changes a certain group membership that's local that you'll see there. And then we'll also take a look at the client. The main client is the remote desktop connection client. We'll also take a look at, for example, a web-based client, as well as a remote desktops plural client that will allow you to connect to multiple machines at one time. Remote assistance involves two people, a novice and an expert, and we'll see that, first of all, the novice normally will request an invitation to be sent to the expert. The expert opens the invitation, also known as a ticket, and then the remote assistance session will begin. You also see that the expert can offer assistance to the user. This might be useful if the user does not know how to create an invitation or is somehow otherwise hampered from creating one. Let's go ahead and take a look now and pick up with remote desktop, and we'll cover also remote assistance and terminal services as well later on. With remote desktop, remember that from the remote tab you have to have selected this checkbox, and administrators can already connect by default, but if you need to, you can also add additional users. By the way, even if you add somebody to this list, if this user, for example, has a blank password, they will still not be allowed to connect, and that's probably not relevant unless you're migrating a machine from out of a lab where you might have had just dummy accounts with blank passwords or something like that. In any case, you can also then add additional users. Now, notice in our previous nugget that I talked about doing this as well, and in the object types I pointed out that we can use groups. Well, why aren't I seeing groups here? Well, that's because we're focused right now only on the local machine, where it will not allow you to select groups, but if you choose locations and then choose a directory, such as nuggetlab.com, then in the object types, then once again, we have groups that we can choose from here. Then having all that put together, let's go ahead and take a look at the properties of the remote desktop connections so that you can see what your various options are. And you see, all that really happens when we add these users into this list is they're just added to a specific group. And if you right-click on my computer and choose Manage to go to the Computer Management Console here, where I am right now, and go to the groups, you'll see that we have a group called Remote Desktop Users, which appears on all XP and Windows Server 2003 machines. And if we double-click on it, we see this exact same membership we just added in the previous interface. That's really all it does, is it adds membership there. And it's important to know about the group here, because you can use a group policy object, and you can add this to something called restricted groups, and that's a little bit beyond our scope, but the effect of it is that you can change the membership for remote desktop users across your entire enterprise according to whichever scope of management you want, whether it's site, domain, or organizational unit. And that would then prevent you from having to visit each XP and 2003 machine and manually adjusting who's a member of this remote desktop users group. And now let's go ahead and take a look at the client piece, which is the remote desktop connection client, and we'll see the various options that are available to us. Now, first, to get to the remote desktop connection, what you have to do is access it through the Start menu. So, you click on Start, All Programs, Accessories, Communications, and then finally, way out here, you get Remote Desktop Connection. Imagine having to do that every time you need to access it. I think I know why they call it Remote Desktop Connection. Anyway, once you click on that, you'll see that there are several options that are available to you. And let's briefly address what these are. Many of these will also be covered in 2 or 3 other locations as well. And so we'll just address many of them here. And when we see them repeated, we won't re-explain them. We'll just kind of point out that they've been shown before. In any case, on the General tab, you specify which computer you want to connect to. Anything you've connected to in the past will also be listed, as well as the ability to browse. You have a username here, which will be persistent so that the next time you make a connection, the same username reappears. It's the same as it does typically in a normal logon dialog box. You can enter in a password and save it if you want, but I strongly recommend against that unless you really have a high priority on convenience and you're very isolated in what you're doing, maybe in a lab or a completely cut off network, for example. Then you can also save the connection settings. In other words, all the settings that I'll make through these other tabs, which I'll show you shortly, can all be saved. And when you save them, by default, they're going into a default.rdp file. Now, you can also edit this file using Notepad. So I can right-click Open with Notepad here, and it shows me all of the settings here. Now, most of these will make more sense as I get into the various options that are available, but you can see, for example, how some of these will be easily configurable just from a text editor. By the way, if you did choose to save the password is hashed and appears way down at the bottom here, and it's got to be, I don't know, 8 or 10 lines of just nothing but gobbledygook in the way that the password is hashed, so it's secure in that sense as well. In any case, you can also save additional RDP connections, and then you can put them in a commonly accessible location for user accessibility, and maybe distribute them to your clients so that they already have a pre-configured settings for their RDP connections. And before we move on, let me just point out that you can make a connection not just with this flat namespace, but you can also use an IP address or fully qualified DNS name as well. Now on the display tab, you see that we can adjust from a variety of different resolutions. I'm using 640 by 480 at this time, so that's the only thing I've got here. If I had other resolutions, they would also appear incrementally in between here, clear up to the full screen mode. And then we can choose from various color depths as well. You can go as high as 24-bit. I can't go that high because my actual desktop here that I'm physically at is only 16-bit color depth. If I had chosen 32-bit color depth, then I would have another option available on this drop-down list. You can also display a connection bar, and when in full screen mode, you've seen that in many of my connections in the past, where it's that little thing that kind of drops down up here. It's a little yellowish in color, and it names the computer at the top. And that's very handy if you want to minimize the desktop connection, or if you want to close it or disconnect it without having to use the start menu. So it's kind of convenient that way. Then local resources will identify how we handle peripherals and how we handle various other functions. For example, remote computer sound, which is new with XP in 2003, allows us, if we want to bring this sound to this computer. And so you can do that. You can also configure all of this through several other options, such as group policy. You might want to prevent being able to bring sound to this computer if you've got a lot of users that are playing MP3 files all over your network and bring in the sound from a terminal server, for example. That would really consume quite a lot of bandwidth. So up to your judgment. You can also just do not play or leave the sound at the remote computer, which is also kind of a handy way to play practical jokes if you're seeing there's nobody there and you're playing wave sounds that are kind of rude or something like that, and everybody else around there wonders what's going on. So that's just my juvenile little mind at work there. Anyway, we also have the keyboard item. We can leave the keyboard combinations on the local computer where you're actually physically seated, or on the remote computer you can leave it, or only in full screen mode, which is what we're in right now, and which is what we also see when you have the little drop-down item. You can also put a remote desktop connection or a terminal services connection into a window, which just looks like a normal Windows window, and it has a minimize button and a close and a maximize button and all of that. Now let me also point out that with these items, it's probably best if I just actually show you how to do this, but for example, with disk drives, I can see not only the disk drives on the remote system that I'm connecting to, whether it's a terminal server or whether it's remote desktop, but I would also be able to see the drives on the machine that I'm currently located on. This might be very handy if I need to drag and drop or copy and paste files back and forth between the remote system and my physical console. By the way, console is another way of saying the physical system that you're currently logged onto and seated in front of. In any case, I could choose disk drives. Notice I get a big warning when I get that and try to click on connect. And the reason for that is because it's potentially unsafe. I mean, for example, if I have files on this local machine that I'm physically seated at for this console, and one of them's got a virus in it, and I connect to a terminal server that has hundreds of people depending on it, if that virus from my local drive bleeds over somehow into my terminal services connection, then it can affect all the drives on the terminal server and potentially hundreds of users at the same time. So there are some potentially unsafe issues there that you should be aware of. In any case, we'll go ahead and make just a real quick connection here. And having connected then, we'll go open up Windows Explorer and see that you can indeed see drives on both ends of the connection by right-clicking and choosing Explore here. And the way this will appear then is we'll have our local drives. This is the drive that's actually in the terminal services connection. I'm connected to DC Nugget 2 right now, which you can see right up here. My terminal services remote desktop, that is. Remote desktop connection is DC Nugget 2. And that's its drive, and these are its physical drives as well. However, backwards across the network, this is DC Nugget 1, where I'm physically seated right now, and all of these drives appear. And that's what I was talking about earlier. There's a virus on this drive, and it's on the loose right now. It could potentially infect this drive and any other users that, in turn, would depend upon it. For printers, let me point out that I am physically seated at DC Nugget 1, and that's where I started my connection with remote desktop to DC Nugget 2. DC Nugget 2 is where you see me connected right now, and I'll just push pin this so that we can confirm that we're staying there. And what we see here is a couple of printers. There's a printer on both DC Nugget 1 and on DC Nugget 2. If I were physically seated at DC Nugget 2, I would not see this printer. that would not be there at all. If I were physically seated at DC Nugget 2 and logged on locally to that console, this is the only printer that would be there, and that's the one that was installed for DC Nugget 2. The reason why I see this printer is because I selected printers as a local resource, and that's handy because if we're separated by continents or something, if I'm physically seated at DC Nugget 1, which is in Los Angeles, and DC Nugget 2 is in London, if I send a 100-page print job and I don't use this local printer item, that means that I've only got this printer, and when I send a print job across, it's going to send 100 pages across the pond to this LaserJet, and that's not going to do anybody any good, and it's going to make people in London mad at me. Now returning to our remote desktop connection options here, we also see that we can connect serial ports. Don't really need to do that too much anymore, but that is kind of handy if you have something like a retail item, like a barcode scanner that's connected to your physical local serial port, then it will be able to actually be used in the terminal services or remote desktop connection. By the way, I've said terminal services and remote desktop kind of interchangeably, and for our purposes with this client, they really are, with rare exception. Then we can also use smart cards so that I can physically be seated at one system and use a smart card to remotely connect to another system. And that's also a very secure way to make sure that remote desktop connection is secure. Now on the Programs tab, we can specify that a specific program starts. This does not relate to remote desktop. This only relates to terminal services, in which case you enter in the program path and file name there. We may cover that more when we talk about terminal services later on. In the experience, you can allow or omit certain functionality. For example, desktop background. If it's a high color desktop background and it's consuming too much bandwidth, you can deselect that item, which also you see is the equivalent of using a broadband connection at one of these kinds of connections. You can also just go to one of these other automated settings, a modem at 56K, allows you to use desktop themes and bitmap caching. So you can see how that's kind of graduated there. And then you can also reconnect if the connection is dropped. That's very handy if you're on an unreliable modem connection that drops out periodically, or if you're on something like a wireless network and you're moving a laptop between access points and you might drop or blink the connection in between. Well, if that happens, it'll attempt to reconnect. Now all that remains in order to make a remote desktop connection is to simply click on the remote desktop connection icon, which you see I've put mine in the quick launch area here because I don't want to go through that circuitous route all through the start menu to get to it. So I simply click on it, click on connect. I'll get my warning about the disk drives item. I'll probably clear that later on so I don't keep getting that message. And then that's pretty much it. Just enter in a username and a password, and you're logged on and ready to go. Now for the busy administrator, there's another tool that's very handy with remote desktop, because you see, what can happen is if you're connecting to a dozen servers all the time throughout the day doing various types of administration, you can have a dozen remote desktop connections on the taskbar here, and it gets really difficult to sort through each one. So instead, you can go to Administrative Tools and go down here where we have this Remote Desktops item, which is new. Now, that's also been available in Windows 2000, but you had to download an additional item that you had to install to add it into a console like this. Anyway, you go to Remote Desktops, right-click, choose Add New Connection, and then you can add in the name of the server, DC Nugget 2, for example. You can also connect to the console. This means that if there is somebody currently logged on in a physical logon to that workstation or that server, then you will assume that connection. You're taking that connection over. Only works if it's the same credentials that you enter in here, however. If I enter in administrator credentials like my administrator account here, my trainer account here, then if the user that's currently logged onto the machine that I'm about to connect to as the console is just another user account, then I can kick that user off. They may lose data, and it will then log on this account. In any case, I'm going to go ahead and log on as trainer. The physical console logon is also trainer, so we'll just assume that connection that already exists. And once again, of course, you can save the password with a good degree or a good dose of discretion if you really want to do that. Now that I've done that much, I can go ahead and just click on DC Nugget 2 here. It logs me onto the console where you can see I've already got an existing session going on. And due to screen resolution limitations, we don't see the whole thing here. But we see that I've already got something going on. I've already been working with the user's account over there. And then I can add another connection here where I'll fill in all these blanks. Then it'll connect to this connection. So now I just click on Client 01, it uses the credentials that I'd already specified, logs me on, and I get my Windows XP desktop. Now I can just very simply click back and forth between, a dozen or however many I got, this server, this client, how many other clients or servers I've got. Very simple, very easy to work with. Now, here I've returned also to DC Nugget 2, where I've gone to Application Server in the Windows Components wizard, double-click on that. Notice that I already have IIS installed. there's another element that can be installed that's kind of a companion to IIS and to remote desktop or terminal services. And it allows me to make a remote desktop or terminal services connection to this IIS server. What I'll do is I'll open those components, and then I'll go down to World Wide Web Service, go to its details, and then I'll finally go down here to Remote Desktop Web Connection to select that, and OK through all these dialog boxes. That's a lot of dialog boxes. And then finally, once it's done installing the new pieces there, I'll be able to establish a remote desktop connection via a web browser to this server. Now, to be able to make that connection, what you do now is to go to a browser from some other machine, and then we won't be able to make the complete connection, and I'll explain to you why shortly here, but we go to HTTPS, there's the clue as to why we won't be able to make the complete connection right this moment, and we'll enter in the web address, and that's dcnugget2.nuggetlab.com, and then /tsweb, and that's what we would enter in. Now, this HTTPS connection will have a certificate on DC Nugget 2, but it also requires a client certificate on my part, on the user's part over here. Since I don't have one, it won't allow me to make the connection. But if you have those, then that's available. This was also possible in Windows 2000. You had to download a component again to make this capability available, but it didn't require a certificate back then. Then you could just make a normal HTTP connection. Now then, just to show you how this is done offline here, I went back over to that IIS server on DC Nugget 2, and I removed the secure communication requirement for requiring secure channel, or SSL, and that way we can connect the same way we did with Windows 2000. Now, I'll go ahead and make the connection. You will also receive, and we didn't see it here, but you'll also receive one of those prompts asking you to download an ActiveX control. I've already downloaded that as well. And then once you've done that, you just simply enter in the server you want to connect to, and press connect, and it's going to open it up in what looks like a normal remote desktop connection with the little bar up here and all that kind of stuff. Then we'll just enter in the credentials for trainer, if I can type here, and then we'll enter the password, press enter to log on, and we see that we're now back in business. Now, if I restore this window, notice that what happens is it takes me into, you guessed it, a browser, because that is where I actually am connected, is through a web browser, as we see right now. Now notice here that I've returned to the web browser, and really all that this does through IIS is it makes IIS a conduit for any machine that I want to connect to. So that if I wanted to connect to, for example, my Windows XP computer, client 01, I could do that, and DC Nugget 2 as my web browser just acts as a conduit for that connection. I could use this to also connect to a whole cluster of terminal services if I want, when we talk about terminal services. So really all IIS does here is it doesn't make just a connection to itself, it's a conduit for any connection that I have network connectivity to. Well, now let's move into remote assistance. Remote assistance is similar to remote desktop, except that with remote assistance, of course, you have two people, the novice who's seeking help and the expert who is able to help. And typically the way this works is the novice will invite the expert to help them. So let's take a look at that perspective first. For example, here I've got a Windows Server 2003 server, and I've got a user log on, Phoenix User 05. This user is a member of the account operators group, so they can do just about everything with users' accounts, including things such as resetting passwords. Well, Phoenix User 05 is my new intern, my summer intern, and he's just trying to figure out how to do a few things here. And he goes into this and he says, you know what, Phoenix User 02 called me, and they said they can't remember their password. So I need to reset it. Now, if I go into their account, I'm looking all over the place, and I don't see any place where I can change the password to something else. I go down through here, I can't see anything in here. I see some stuff about passwords. I don't know, I'm just going to call somebody else. So this person just said, you know what, I need some help, and that's when they can initiate an invitation for remote assistance. There are three primary ways that this can take place, and let's take a look at those. Now, the first thing the user can do is to use Windows Messenger, and that's not installed in Windows Server 2003 by default, although it does appear on Windows XP. And by the way, for all the purposes I'm about to show you for remote assistance, remote desktop that I just showed you, as well as terminal services, almost all of it's the same, whether you're using XP or Windows Server 2003. Of course, we need to know how to do this from Windows Server 2003, so we'll go ahead and take a look at it there. Now, we're going to look for Windows Messenger, and here we go to msn.com, the default page. Of course, we see a letter from Bill Gates, message from Bill Gates. I'm sure it says something like, buy Linux, or something like that. No, just kidding, Bill. Sorry about that. Anyway, go down here and we'll see that there's a chat thing. We say, oh, that might make sense. Maybe I can find what I need here in the people and chat thing. Or if I'm single, maybe I can find romance. Anyway, we go down here. Oh, MSN Messenger. That sounds about right. So we go into this. Then we see this download now item, and you're just tempted to go ahead and click on that and download MSN Messenger. But you see, that's not what we really want. It looks the same. You even see the little icons up here. They're the same kind of icons, the same kind of functions you can do. You can still chat with people, but we're looking for Windows Messenger, not MSN Messenger, and we can't get it from there. Now, I don't know how good you are at finding things on the internet. I think I'm okay, but it seemed to me that to get to Windows Messenger on Microsoft's web page, I had to click through a whole bunch of different stuff. Anyway, I finally was able to get there, and you could just search for it on Microsoft's web page, and finally we got to Windows Messenger, and the current version is 5.0, maybe different at the time that you see this. So then you just download it. It's about 8 megabytes or so, then install it, and then you're ready to go. I've already downloaded it, and I've already installed it, so now I've got Windows Messenger here. All I have to do at this point is to simply log in, find another user that can help me, and then I can request assistance. Now then, I've installed Windows Messenger, I've logged in, but just to confirm, notice that on the Remote tab, I do have this checkbox to allow invitations to be sent from this computer. Now, I'm going to ask James Conrad for help. It says he's busy, but you know what? I'll bother him anyway. So we'll just right-click here, and then we'll ask him for remote assistance. He won't mind. I'm sure it won't be a problem. So we'll click on Ask for Remote Assistance, and, ooh, what does that say? Does not have remote assistance installed. Uh-oh, that looks like a problem. Now, cutting back over here to where James Conrad is actually seated, we see that we had received an invitation from this person, but it was declined because the program is disabled or not installed on my computer. What? Well, I've got Windows Messenger here, so that doesn't seem like a problem. Let me tell you what this is about. You see, even though someone else is asking me for assistance, I am not able to help them as the expert unless in my system properties on the Remote tab, I also have this checkbox to turn on remote assistance. Because that doesn't just allow invitations to be sent from this computer, it also just turns on remote assistance, allowing it to be a two-way street and allowing me to both send and receive assistance. So now we'll cut back over to DC Nugget 2, where our user will attempt to send another invitation to this user, and we'll see what happens then. So now I've cut back over to DC Nugget 2, where we have the novice who's attempting to ask James Conrad for remote assistance. So he right-clicks on James Conrad once again, tries to ask for remote assistance. This time it doesn't look like it's going to be a problem. Over on James Conrad's side, he now is able to see the invitation, so he'll go ahead and accept it. Now we have to cut back over to DC Nugget 2, because on that end we'll see another message. And then here that message is. You see, this person has accepted the remote assistance invitation, and the user still has to prompt this and say yes to allow that person to see your screen and to chat with you. And that's just an additional measure that prevents people from accidentally being eavesdropped upon or deliberately being eavesdropped upon without their knowledge. So this person will say yes from the novice side. Now then, cutting back over here to DC Nugget 1, where we have the expert here, James Conrad is here, we can see the interface over here. We are able to actually chat some messages. You know, we could end a message here, send it in. We see that it is received on the other side. And then we see that the person sent in a response. They can't remember how to reset the password. Okay, great. Now we have the chat ability here, but we already had that with Windows Messenger. What this gives us, in addition, is also the ability to do things like take control. Let me also point out over here, you'll see two different ways of viewing this. Right now it's at scale to window, so that it just fits in the screen. And it might be useful if you can also go to actual size, and sometimes it makes it a little bit easier to read. It depends on your screen resolution as well. My screen resolution is rather small right now, so it's a little bit easier to read this way. But you can see the whole screen if you scale to the window. Anyway, now as the expert, I want to take control, and that will send an invitation to them saying, hey, do you want to allow this person to take control of your computer? Once again, they have to answer yes to the prompt. Now then, once they answer yes, it now tells me as the expert that I am sharing control of that computer. Now, that means that I can move the mouse back and forth within their window, okay? And they can also move it back and forth within their window. So it might be a good idea, at least if you're on the phone, or send them a message entry over here to please take your hands off the keyboard and mouse while the real expert goes to work over here. By the way, also let me point out that if this remote assistance window is kind of in your way and you want to get rid of it, don't close it, because that also disconnects this session and we have to start all over again. So instead, just minimize it, minimize whatever you want here, and now you can go to work helping this person, and you say, okay, here's how you do what you need to do. You want to reset a user's password, all you do is you go to Active Directory Users and Computers, and then you go down to that user's account, you right-click on it, you don't open the account. Boy, where do we get these interns? And then you just hit Reset Password and enter in whatever password you want it to be. And you can force them to change the password to the next logon if you want as well, so that you can for sure say that you don't know that user's password. And the user's password's changed. Ta-da! There you go. Now also, if the user at any time becomes uncomfortable with what I'm doing here, maybe I'm not who they think I am, or maybe I'm trying to get them fired or something, and they see me right-clicking on this user account and going out down here to delete. Well, if they don't like that, they can immediately hit escape on their keyboard before I can hit delete here, and then it immediately kicks me out right here. And that's because of using the escape key. So now I no longer have control, and I cannot do anything within their session. They would have to do it on their end. And even on my side, I can also press escape to stop taking control. Now, the other thing I can do here then, once I'm finished, is you can just disconnect. Then let's take a look at another way that the user can request assistance from me. All they have to do is to also click on Start, Help and Support. And once they get to Help and Support, there will be a link for asking for remote assistance up here underneath the support link. So we simply click Remote Assistance, and then we invite someone to help us. So we click on that. And then if we want to, we can sign into Windows Messenger here. This gives us just another way of, again, using Windows Messenger. And then we can also use this method, which is to use email. And in this case, we might just enter in a person's first name, the way it asks us to right there. And then you just click Continue. And when you do this, you have to set up some configuration options for the invitation. You see, with Windows Messenger, the invitation is instant, and it's not just sitting out there indefinitely. With this kind of an invitation, an email invitation, or a third type of invitation, which I'll talk to you about shortly, then what could happen is an invitation could sit out there indefinitely unless you specify a length of time for it, 99 days. I don't think we want to go that long. So I usually say something like an hour is usually pretty reasonable, just because you don't want to leave something out there and potentially leave open a security vulnerability that someone, given enough time, might be able to figure out and decipher. Hasn't happened before, but just you never want to be the first one to experience a vulnerability, right? So we'll just do this, then we can say that the recipient must use a password, and you can enter in a password in both locations here to confirm the password. Then once you're done, all you have to do is to simply create the email invitation. It'll use whatever email program that you currently have. I've got Outlook Express on this machine because it's a default email application on all our Windows operating systems these days. And then here we see the invitation, the email invitation. We simply enter in an email address, and along with this boilerplate text, it's going to send it to them. You can enter in your own message here if you like. Do not include the session password, because this secure socket layer connection to a Microsoft website is how the recipient will establish remote assistance with you, and the only way they can do that is by knowing the password. So you wouldn't want an eavesdropper or someone who intercepts this email to be able to click on that link and then to potentially take control of your system impersonating somebody else. So anyway, we'll go ahead and send this, and then on the receiving end, we'll go ahead and take a look at the link. And then here on the expert side, we're going to go ahead and take this link and paste it into a browser and press enter. We're going to view this over a secure connection. That's fine. Click OK. And then once we do that, we'll also see that we're going to get the non-secure and secure items. That's a common message. We'll click OK here as well. This is what you want to be sure that you download. You want to have to be able to download the Remote Assistance Server Control, and we'll just always trust from content from the Microsoft Corporation, of course. So we'll just click on that, and then we'll click on yes. You don't have to click on that. I'm just being facetious. And then we'll click on yes to download the controller we need, and now we're able to start a remote assistance session with that user. Now then, all that remains is we've got to go down here to the Start Remote Assistance button where we'll click, and then we enter in the password. Now make sure that the novices do not send you passwords via email, because if someone's intercepting their email, they'll be able to get both the invitation with the secure link in it and the password, and then they can impersonate you as the expert, so we don't want that to happen. You'll go ahead and click on yes to start the remote assistance invitation right at this point. They will go ahead and click on yes on their screen because they will see a prompt, and then we have the remote assistance initiated right here. Now then finally, the last way that you can send an invitation is to go back to Help and Support, and then once you get to the Remote Assistance link again, go back down to Invite Someone to Help You. And in this case, it's possible that a user is having trouble sending internet email. And if that's the case, they can't very well send you an email. And if they're having trouble with internet email, they probably can't get on the internet either, so they can't use Windows Messenger either. So the final option that they have available would be to save the invitation as a file. That's also a good idea if you want to prevent an invitation from going out on the internet somehow and potentially being compromised. compromised. So we can keep this internally and save it as a file so that we can either put it on transportable media of some kind, or better yet, a network share that both you as the novice and the expert would be able to access. So we'll save the invitation as a file, enter in our name as the person who's requesting help, a reasonable length of time for the expiration of the invitation. As we click on continue, we'll require a password, of course, and that's always a good idea for security purposes. Then we save the invitation. Once we save the invitation, you can't just use the default name, which is RA invitation, but you can name it something more intuitive if you like. I usually just do something like, Phoenix User 5 seeks help from trainer. Kind of sounds like one of the classified ads from the singles pages there. Phoenix User 5 seeks help from someone who likes long walks in the rain and Carpenter's music. If you're the trainer, please reply. Anyway, I'm saving this on a network location. I just put it in the home directory where we have a folder for any open invitations like this. And we'll go ahead and click on Save here. And then that's pretty much it. And then all that remains is, as the expert, you go to the share, wherever that is, like we've got here, Phoenix User 5 seeks help from trainer. Kind of sounds like I know way too much about the personals classified ads, doesn't it? All right, moving right along here. We also see that Microsoft gives this gigantic extension. Whatever happened to the 3-letter extension? I don't know. Anyway, you just double-click on that, and then it starts remote assistance as usual. You just enter in the password, click on yes, and then again, on their end of the things, they will have to answer yes to a prompt. Once they do that, once again, we're back in business and able to assist this user. Now also, you need to be able to manage the invitations that you've sent out, so you can go back to Help and Support Center as the novice and click on the Remote Assistance link again, and then just view the invitation status. Any of these that have expired because of a real timeout will show expired down here. You can also forcibly expire one if you like, and you can also select one and click on Delete, of course, to delete that invitation. Likewise, if we realize that we have one that's expired and it was before the expert had a chance to respond to us as the novice, then we could click on Resend. It takes us back through Help and Support Center to the same interfaces that you were accustomed to seeing in the past, and then you just go ahead and resend it as usual. And really, it just sets a different expiration for it at that point. Now also be aware of the fact that both the email invitation, that link in that email, and the file invitation are reusable, so I can use them as many times as necessary up until their actual expiration. And also, let's just take a technical look at the details of that invitation. If I right-click on it and choose Open With, I can open it with Notepad, and it's actually an XML file, even though it doesn't end in XML. That's actually what it is. Now, if we look at this, we see I've got the word wrap on, otherwise it actually all appears on a single line. And this gives us a little bit of information about it. For example, who the user was. This gives us port information. For example, here's the IP address. And what happens is, when it does make the connection attempt from the expert to the client, it attempts to connect to this IP address and this port number. And if it comes through some kind of a NAT device or a network address translation device, that's especially one that's universal plug-and-play compliant, then that NAT device will redirect whoever's mapped to that port number. And in this case, it would be the 10.10.10.21 IP address. Now, if it cannot make a connection to this IP address and port number, the second thing it does is it falls back to this IP address and this port number. Then if it can't connect to that, then it goes to the fully qualified domain name, and there's no NetBIOS resolution in this. So it's either got to be one of these IP addresses or the domain name. If this is a multi-home machine that it's attempting to connect to, then it will attempt to connect to each IP address that is designated for each individual network card. We see also that the ticket is encrypted, and there is a obfuscated password stub information here that's just indecipherable. That's part of what the encryption is supposed to do for us, isn't it? And then there's also this DT start. This is a timestamp that designates how long this is good for. Actually, when the timestamp starts, it's good for 60 minutes. And if this is in a different time zone, if the expert and the novice are in different time zones, it compensates for that on the expert side. So you're not going to get into an issue where just because you're off an hour in time zones, it's going to automatically expire the ticket. Also, if someone intercepts an expert's invitation and attempts to change their own system time, they will clock down the system tray, they change their own system time, then when they attempt to connect to the client connects the start time with their own time, and if they see that it's exceeded the DT length over here, then it will still refuse the ticket. So there's really no way to trick that by just changing the local system time. Now here I'm on DC Nugget 2, and if we look at local users in groups under the computer management, we see in the users here we have a help assistant followed by a random sequence of letters and numbers here. Every XP and Server 2003 computer has a help assistant account followed by the random numbers sequence there. What this is this the account that's used to log on as the expert when the expert makes the connection to this novice computer. This account is normally disabled, and it also has a strong randomly generated password that the system generates. It's also configured so that the user cannot change the password. That way, if it ever becomes compromised, someone cannot change the password to whatever they want and then take advantage of the account. Also, if there are no outstanding active tickets available, then this account becomes disabled again. In our case, I've got an open ticket right here. So in fact, even if I select that and just expire it immediately right now, go back to computer management and refresh the screen, we see that the help assistant account becomes disabled again. Now let's also take a look at policies and remote assistance. There's really only one that's relative to what we're talking about so far. And you can locate the policy in whatever organizational unit suits your purposes or whatever scope of management is required. I'm just going to go to an existing policy that I have, and that's my default domain policy, which you've seen me access many times probably in the past as well. Now, the policy we're looking for is under Computer Configuration Administrative Templates, System, and then remote assistance. And there's really only one that we need to be concerned about right now, and that's the solicited remote assistance. By default, all your systems can solicit remote assistance, so since this is not configured, that means it will not interfere with that default behavior. However, we can open this up and disable remote assistance entirely if you're concerned about security or something like that. Probably is not really much of a need for that, but you could do it if you needed to. Or you could enable this, which is already, like I said, enabled, but when you enable it, you can also specify more granular control so that you can allow helpers to remotely control or only view the computer. And then you can specify the maximum ticket value for your tickets. You can also specify the default method for sending email invitations. The Mail To item will use whatever's configured within Internet Explorer as the default email client, and it will send within it the link to the Microsoft website, the secure link there that you saw me use earlier. Or if you use the simple Mappy item, it just simply attaches an invitation as an email attachment. And so those are the options that are available for this. Now I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, James, I've got users who could never figure out how to get into Help and Support Center and create their own ticket. So if that's the case, you can also offer remote assistance, because if they're complaining to you over the phone that they can't figure out how to do something, then you can offer them remote assistance without having to have them go through the Help and Support Center. But in order to do that, we have to explicitly enable this policy. And then, of course, you can, again, control whether they can control the computer or only view the computer. And then you have to specify who your helpers are. And then you click on Add. Now, notice there's no Browse item here, so I can't browse through Active Directory users and computers. So I'm going to have to know exactly what I need here. And the way you enter in is the name of the domain followed by the name of the group or the user. Either one. I'm just going to do the group because my Phoenix admins, for example, might be the people that are going to be offering the remote assistance here. And I can also do the same thing for just domain admins. So I've gone ahead and added them in here as well. And just add whatever suits your purposes. Then when you're done with that, it's pretty simple. You just click OK. Now, since this is a computer configuration, any of the people that we want to help and we want to offer remote assistance to will have to reboot their computers first so that this policy will apply. Thereafter, we'll be able to offer remote assistance. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Now then, if I have someone that's struggling with something over on DC Nugget 2, then I can go into Help and Support Center to offer them remote assistance. Now, you would think that, of course, we want to offer remote assistance, so I would click on Remote Assistance, right? I mean, that's where all this stuff is, right? Well, where is it? All this talks about is asking somebody else to help me. That's not what we want. It's the other way around. Well, you're not going to get it from here, and in a quite counterintuitive fashion, Microsoft has placed that part of remote assistance under an entirely different part of the support tasks, and it's located under Tools down here. Would you believe it? So anyway, there it is. And we still don't even see it. Once we get there, we then have to go to the Help and Support Center Tools. Then we don't go to Remote Assistance, but we go to Offer Remote Assistance. And finally, we get there. Here you can just type in any resolvable name, such as a flat name, as long as you have DNS that can resolve it, or as long as it's on your network and can be resolved by any other method, either a broadcast or WINS or something like that. Or you can do the fully qualified domain name or IP address. I'll just put in DC Nugget 2, and then we'll go ahead and connect. So then we'll simply enter in the name of the server we want to connect to and click on connect. At that point, it'll say that there's someone already logged on to that server, and we have to specify which user we want to assist. And this is useful if you have multiple logons on that same server. But that's all right. We have a single user logged on right now. We'll click Start Remote Assistance over on their end. They will receive that familiar yes/no connection request. If they click on yes, then of course we'll be able to make the connection. They just now clicked on yes, so now we have control, or at least the ability to view this connection. And once again, we can take control and all that kind of stuff just like we've done in the past. In this nugget, we took a look at remote desktop and remote assistance. We started with remote desktop, which has an emphasis on a single user trying to connect to a remote machine for productivity purposes to get tasks done. We looked at how to enable that and also how to add individual users or groups to the capability of making a remote desktop connection, which actually just adds membership to the local remote desktop users group. And then we also took a look at the clients. You can use the remote desktop connection client, which has several options we looked at. You can use an IIS connection to make the connection as well, and you can use remote desktops, which is on Windows Server 2003, allowing you to connect to multiple machines at once. We also looked at remote assistance, which really involves two people, a novice and an expert. The novice sends out an invitation. We look at three ways to do that: Windows Messenger, email, or as a file invitation. And then we also took a look at how the expert can offer assistance without an invitation. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.